So, I am not sure how much I understand in this lecture. I understand some, which I will say. For the rest, I will ask help, and when I cannot say anything more, we will stop. So, the goal is, so we understand this part. So let's write this down here. That you have a complex semi-simple Lie algebra. Remember, for the structure theory, we have to choose a maximal toral subalgebra H, which is then self, it's its own centralizer, it does not commute with anything bigger. And then under its add action, the Lie algebra breaks up into weight spaces, which we call root spaces here. All of these are non-zero because all the zero weight space is in here. The total the entire weights that occur, they are finitely many, we call them phi, and that sits inside H star, and there is a lot of structure on this. So, the theorem is that this completely characterizes your semi-simple Lie algebra. So, what does it mean? Is that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the Lie algebras and these root systems. Okay. But there are, so if you think of this as a map from given a Lie algebra to a root system, then we first have to show that this map is well defined, because apparently there is some dependence on this choice here. So, that is going to be our major issue that we will address today. But having done that, so let us assume that for now. We have to also show that this map is one to one and that it is onto. So, what this means is that if two Lie algebras give me the same root system, by the same I mean of course isomorphic, I have a notion of isomorphism of root systems, then the Lie algebras to begin with must have been isomorphic. And there is a more low tech proof of this, which I will state, I will state the theorem, but we have already proved this using more sophisticated machinery. One way to show that the root system, one way to show that is that given the root system, you can completely reconstruct the Lie algebra. And how did we do that? By just writing down the Lie algebra in terms of generators and relations, which were completely determined by the root system data. Okay. So, that shows that the map is one to one, but it also shows the next thing, namely that the map is onto. So, what is required here is that given a root system, there is actually some Lie algebra which produces that, and again Sayre's construction actually produces the Lie algebra, right. So, both of these things are done. So, let us come to the first one. Okay. And I want you to first understand this, is that if we show that all, so let us recall what H is. H is a maximal toral subalgebra. H maximal toral. Maximal just means maximal, and toral means that contains only semi-simple elements, and then they are forced to commute with each other. Okay. So, we would show that there is no dependence on H if we show that given any two such H, they are conjugate under some automorphism of the Lie algebra. So, first of all, this statement should be philosophically clear. If there is an automorphism of the Lie algebra, then anything that you which takes, let us say, H1 to H2, then whatever construction that you do with H1 under the automorphism, you can do the same thing for H2, right, and everything is going to correspond. So, this is an exercise that you should sit down and do, because really speaking, what should we need to do? Let us write this down. So, assuming this, assuming this. So forget for a moment what this E of L is. Suppose that there is an automorphism assuming this. Say that given two maximal toral subalgebras, there is some f which is actually an automorphism of the Lie algebra, which takes one to the other. Then what is it that we have to see? And then I will leave it for you to see that. But what is it that we would need to prove? Okay, well, it's an automorphism, right? Remember the notion of semi-simple, nilpotent, all of those are intrinsic notions. So that is fine. And the definition makes it clear that under an automorphism, a maximal toral subalgebra would have to go to a maximal one. If it were not maximal, you would put it something bigger, pull it back, etc. So that is clear that both are maximal toral. But see, this H is going to produce a root system phi, and this H prime is going to produce a root system phi prime. We have to show that those root systems are, well, are they going to be the same, as in the exact same things? No, because one is, and in fact, so this is, so let's write this down. So L is going to, so this is part of that. So L is going to look like H direct sum. I will write only one direct sum, okay, here, L alpha in phi, and it's also going to equal H prime direct sum alpha prime in phi prime, L alpha prime, okay. But where does this phi sit? It sits in H dual, this sits in H prime dual. They are not even the same vector spaces. So we know the notion of what it means for two root systems to be isomorphic to each other, and that's what we would have to do. So at the outset we have to have a bijection between roots, right? Is it clear how the bijection is going to come? I mean, it's a matter of writing down, but do you see what's going to happen? This root L alpha, this root space L alpha is going to get mapped under the Lie algebra automorphism onto this one. Right? It's a matter of writing this down. See, alpha and alpha prime, they are of course not the same, but there is a way to go from one to the other, right? F is going to, since F induces an isomorphism between H and H prime, that induces an isomorphism from H dual to H prime dual, etc. The root systems will get mapped to each other. But then more than that, what do we have to do? We have to also see about the co-roots. We have to see that all the Cartan integers are the same. So if this is obvious to you, then you don't need to do the exercise. But if it is not completely obvious, then you need to sit down and actually convince yourself about how. But in looking at it from a distance, it should be obvious that if there is an automorphism of the system, it is going to map one kind of data to another kind of data under that automorphism. Okay. So this is going to be our goal, that if you take a semi-simple Lie algebra, then all maximal toral subalgebras are conjugate under an automorphism. In fact, we will show more. We will show this not just for semi-simple Lie algebras, but for arbitrary Lie algebras. But in that case, I have to have the correct definition. Instead of maximal toral subalgebras, I will call them Cartan subalgebras, which has an independent definition, which happens to coincide for semi-simple Lie algebras with our definition. So along the way, we will see several things. The official plans said that state the theorems. I have already stated the theorem, so we could just stop. But there are several other payoffs along the way. So we will talk about Cartan subalgebras, Borel subalgebras. They play a less critical role here in the Lie algebra theory, but in the algebraic group theory, they are absolutely crucial. The theory gets built by using this. Okay. and we will say something about what the structure of the automorphism group of L is. Okay, so our first stop is what is this group. Let us do a little linear algebra. So, now L is going to be arbitrary, but still over complex numbers. So, I will define what a Cartan subalgebra is. It is a nilpotent subalgebra which normalizes itself. Let me write down this definition. L arbitrary. A Cartan subalgebra of L, H a subalgebra, H nilpotent nilpotent subalgebra that normalizes itself. So, I will use the Humphreys notation. What does that mean? It is a subalgebra, so it is closed under brackets, but it is more like a normal subgroup. That is, if there is any element x such that all brackets of x with h land up within h, then x must be in h to begin with. There is, I cannot really enlarge it. The largest Lie algebra of which this is an ideal is itself. Okay. So, I will just write down in case this has not, this is this x such that x h is in h. So, that is the definition. Let us check that this coincides with, let us check that this coincides in the cases that we know with what we have in mind, maximal toral. So, diagonal matrices. Is it true that if you take a maximal toral subalgebra, it is clearly nilpotent, right? Because it is even abelian, it dies right at the first stage, okay. And its normalizer is itself. Is that true? If you take diagonal matrix.
You want it to be nilpotent on all of L?
Ah, no. Okay. So, by nilpotent, I do not mean that nilpotent it consists of nilpotent operators, and I would have said add nilpotent. Nilpotent in the sense of its series. Just want you to see that this condition sort of says that it is nilpotent. So, you cannot really grow too much, right. You will get a nilpotent algebras only up to a certain size, and this is somehow saying that you cannot, that it is in some sense as large as it can be. So, what we will need is, we will need another characterization of this, because the definition, if you look at the definition, is it even clear that such a thing always exists? It is not obvious, right, that in an arbitrary Lie algebra, you want something which is nilpotent and also normalizing itself. It is not clear that such a thing exists. So, I'll erase this. Equivalently, it is a minimal Engel subalgebra, that is the terminology. Do I want to write this down, the definition? Okay. H is minimal. So, this is sort of like saying that it is the largest possible of a certain type. This is going to be an opposite kind of thing, that it is the minimal possible of a certain type. Of what type? I will tell you. Minimal of the form L0 of add x. I have to tell you what this notation means. So, I will just say notation and remarks. So, this is just linear algebra. Suppose V is a vector space with an operator x. Let me stick to the book's notation. T. The operator here being add x and the vector space being L. Then V, I can write it as sum of generalized eigenspaces, correct? So, what is a generalized eigenspace? So, V sub A of T. A is the eigenvalue, so A is going to be in C. What is this? This is, so an eigenspace is simply the kernel of no, T minus, remember T is the operator, T minus A times ID, correct? Generalized eigenspace simply means that some power of it, right? So, I will just write, I do not know, n or infinity, does not really matter. So, n. The n, if you write it in Jordan form, then if you take all blocks of type A, then this n is really the largest one. In absence of that, you can always take n to be the dimension of the vector space. So, whatever. So, that is the notation, and we want to, so I want to apply it to this operator add x. So, add x is not just any kind of operator, right, it is a derivation. And if you recall the earlier lemma, how do generalized eigenspaces behave under derivations? We used a certain formula to show that if you take a derivation, then it is semi-simple and nilpotent parts are also derivations. So, I will write down that fact. So, is the notation clear now? This V sub A T, V is the vector space, A is the eigenvalue and T is the operator. Here the operator is add of x, which is acting on the Lie algebra itself, and I am taking the 0 eigenvalue. Okay. So, recall the general fact. So, L is going to be, this is separate because until further notice my Lie algebras are going to be arbitrary. So, L is going to be L0 of add x plus the other ones A now non-zero of L sub A of add x. And how do these behave under bracket? We know that L sub A of add x, if you take the bracket of that with L sub B of add x, then the bracket of generalized A eigenspace, let me not say just keep saying generalized, by eigenspace I mean generalized here. The bracket of A eigenspace with B eigenspace lands in A plus B eigenspace, right. So, generalized all of them, A plus B add x. And where did this come from? You recall? Recall. That if I take y in here, z in here, then add x minus a minus b to the power n of, this was a general thing. Do you recall this? Raghavan wrote this down for a general algebra. This operator acting on the product. Now the product here is the bracket y, z. I have taken y in the right. So how does there is a binomial expression where the powers I will not write this down here because this should be there in your notes earlier. But let's just recall what the form is. Oh, whatever, might as well because I want it to be. So this is the sum of n choose I, but what are the terms? First one is add x minus a to the I applied to y, and then bracket because multiplication has to happen, right. So multiplication here is bracket with add x minus b to the n minus I of applied to z and their bracket. Is that correct? I hope I got it right. Right? I going from, and this goes exactly like binomial theorem when you just write it down. If you want, you can do it by induction. So what is the upshot of this? Look at that first. I want to say two things based on this. What sort of object is this? So that means I am taking the generalized 0 eigenspace. So if I take A to be 0 and B to be 0, then don't even look at this. What does this say? That this kind of object is actually a it's closed under brackets. Right? So it is a subalgebra. That is one thing. And for later purposes, notice one thing. Let's suppose I take something in here, some fixed thing in here. Let's call it y, right? And suppose I keep applying it. Right? I take this space, I take the bracket with y in here. Then I will go in the generalized eigenspace a plus b of add x. If I apply y again, then I will go in eigenspace corresponding to 2 times a plus b, and again 3 times a plus b. The whole space is finite dimensional. Therefore, eventually this operator will kill this particular thing, but there is nothing special. I mean, the whole space is a direct sum of such things. So therefore, what this shows is that but for this a should be non-zero, because all of these things b plus a, b plus 2a, they should be distinct. Right? So when a is not 0, the operators in here are nilpotent. That is something that we will use later on. In fact, I will just say it right away. Because I wrote down this epsilon L, you recall that whenever I think I can erase this. Because oh, by the way, I did not say this, but the formula makes it obvious that this is true. Okay. If you just peer at the formula, then this is what will come out of it. Okay. Because whatever. So you have to do the same kind of thing as before. You know, if something kills something and something else kills something else, you take a high enough power, etc. Now, so note, therefore, 1 L0 of add x is a subalgebra, and to every y in L sub a add x every y in some L sub a add x, a not equal to 0, is, in Humphrey's language, it is add nilpotent. So that is to say, add y is nilpotent. but these are special kinds of nilpotent elements, namely add nilpotent elements which come from generalized eigenspaces of this particular of this type. I give such elements a name. So, call such y. Okay, where is it? I am getting ahead of myself, but where should I write this? This can go now. So, again I am going to pursue both of these observations. Right now I am just with here. Call y of such elements which is of type in sets L sub A add x, A not equal to 0. Here x could be anything, A could be anything non-zero, n of L, n for nilpotent, and this, okay, this is bad by the way in general. A sort of principle of mathematical writing which a co-author taught me, and before that a reviewer. Generally avoid beginning your sentences with a mathematical symbol, and it is especially true if your previous sentence ends with a mathematical symbol, because you can see it is a recipe for generated by x add y, y in. We know that for nilpotent elements I can take their exponential and it gives me an automorphism, right, of the Lie algebra. Now, I am taking special kinds of nilpotent elements, namely of that type, and I take the subgroup generated by those. It is a fact that this subgroup is normal in all automorphisms. Maybe we will see that, or maybe I will leave it as an exercise, but we have seen what this is. Let me leave this thread for a moment and pursue the Cartan subalgebras, because now hopefully this statement makes sense. Is that Cartan subalgebras, which were defined as nilpotent algebras which normalize themselves, can also be realized as minimal subalgebras of this type. In other words, among all subalgebras of this type, which are generalized eigenspaces of the of the operator which is adding by some element, the smallest ones. So, this is something that I think I am not going to prove. But what I do want to prove is that in view of this characterization, for let me see, but let us try to prove that. We will just assume that these are equivalent. See text. We want to show that now if I come to the case of interest, which is semi-simple Lie algebra, then both of these descriptions are the same as the one that I have taken, namely these are my maximal toral subalgebras. So, let me say this: for L semi-simple, H is maximal toral. So, can we prove this? At least one direction. Let us get rid of this. So can we show that if I have a maximal toral subalgebra, it is a Cartan subalgebra in this or this way and the other way around? How about, it seems to me that this direction may be easier, right? So I have to prove either that or that. It's abelian. So we discussed a little bit of this. So it's abelian, it's nilpotent. Does it normalize itself? Correct. So let's just look at this here. If there is some x which is in the normalizer of H, that means that when H acts by add on that, I will end up inside H, but I know exactly how H acts. It acts semi simply, right, in all of this stuff. So how do we say this? This is essentially done. Exactly. But that cannot happen, right? See, essentially here it is saying the same, normalizer of H is itself saying the same thing as centralizer of H is itself, which we have proved earlier. So the forward direction is okay. How about the backward direction? Here, okay, I have to look at my notes. Okay, so the idea is, by the way, I don't know if I said it quite right. Does everybody believe what I just said? See, the action of H, why can I just go to a single L alpha? The bracket, after all, we are looking at this, correct? Remember what this means? This means I have to consider things of this type, H, X. But the action of H on the whole thing is a diagonal action, right? And so therefore, it boils down to just considering the eigenspaces. And I know that every other eigenspace, if H acts on on a particular L alpha, then the H action is going to take L alpha into itself. So none of the L alphas can be there. So the only thing that is left is H. The reverse direction requires some work. So I will just say that this is okay. So what does this mean? I have to show that I am given something of this type and I want to show that H is maximal toral. So first of all, I have to show that H does consist of semi-simple elements. Let's start by taking something of this type. It is of this type, correct? So L0 of add X. So H is of that type. We want to consider whether elements are semi-simple, etc. So what is the thing that we should try to do? There is that special X, right, such that its generalized 0 eigenspace gives me the Cartan subalgebra. So there is this special element X. I want to worry about whether things are semi-simple or not. What should I do? I can start with X and take its Jordan decomposition. Right? So let's take X equals XS plus XN. Now I claim that L0 of okay. Look at this operator, add XS. By the way, L0 add X, consider something in this space. Right? What does it mean? How does add X act on that space? You think of the matrix if you want. It's a generalized 0 eigenspace, right? So how will add X act on that? Nilpotently, right? Add X will act on that nilpotently. So look at add XS. So add X is add XS plus add XN, right? Okay, let me see. I don't want to get stuck here. So the point here is Okay. All right. Consider vectors in this space. This acts nilpotently because xn is nilpotent, so add of that is nilpotent. And on this space I know that add x acts nilpotently. Remember that all these guys commute with each other. So, this add xs, which by the way acts semi-simply a priori, but it also acts nilpotently because it is the difference of two commuting nilpotent things, right. And so, therefore, this add xs acts on this by sorry, it acts one second, I am floundering here. Correct. So, I think I have said both the things that I needed to say. I will just write down. I do not need this anymore. So, I want to say two things. Let me see. Add xs is in L0 add x and L0 of add xs is, it is the second statement that we just that we just said, because all right, let us see this. So, just stare at this for a moment. This is just linear algebra. Let us see.
The restriction map will not map h to h. With add x, it will not map to h to h. That is the problem.
But it is a generalized eigenspace, no? You mean to h, okay. So, what I said was wrong. Let us, okay. So, now I am a little confused. Help me out here. So, we have to backtrack. Let's try to use these as guidelines. So, what about the first one? Is this clear? Correct.
So, add x restriction on capital H is nilpotent. Already add xn is nilpotent. So, difference is nilpotent.
Yes.
So, it means that.
So, I am talking about just but I am still talking about action only on H here, right. Because add x is of course not nilpotent on the whole thing, but by definition it is nilpotent on this, right. So, add xs is nilpotent on that, okay, then that is why.
Suppose the power of x kills some b.
Correct. Does everybody see this, that what we said, the sentence that he said is precisely makes this point, because what does this say? Exactly. Yes.
So, already xn is nilpotent, add xn is nilpotent.
Yes.
So, some power already kills.
Exactly. So, if you are in this space, then that means that add x is nilpotent on that space, correct. But add xn is also nilpotent on that space, and so therefore, this guy will also be nilpotent. But it is going the other way, no? Or one second, I am. Yeah. So, no. So, I do not want this. I actually want this. So. So, we have to find a fault in what I just said, because that seems to give the other inclusion, and that is not true. But let us try to prove this. Okay. What does this say? This says that add xs acts nilpotently. Of course, add xn acts nilpotently, and so therefore, there some will act nilpotently. So, this is true, but I just said something the other way around. and that doesn't appear, and that should not be true. So what was the fault in that argument? That should be true. So you are saying that we actually should get equality even though it is not plain? Hmm? But all we need is sufficiently large, no? If they commute, everything commutes with, all three things commute with each other there. Let's try. So this is all right, but suppose I take something in here. So x kill set, some power of x kill set. Some power of xn will kill everything, not just that. So of course some power of xn will kill it. So add of xs is semi-simple, yes. Add of xs is semi-simple, yes. So it seems that it is actually, of course what we are doing, it's true, right? Because see, everything is, what we are looking at is only the 0 eigenspace of x, that's where everything is happening. So of course add xs on that is acting by 0. And add xs will not act by 0 on anything else, just because all those eigenvalues will persist. So it seems to me that this should be equality here, right? Even though we don't need it, this is equality. Okay, good. So that was the first observation. Yes.
Why doesn't add xs take h to h?
Okay, why does add xs take h to h? It's okay. So okay, first of all, it's a polynomial in x. I don't know if I need to invoke that, but I can. Right? And this is stable under x, so it is stable under add x, and so it's stable under. Okay, so that is one thing. And now the second thing that I want to say is that L0 of already notice something, even though I am jumping ahead, this is the reason that I wanted to do this. See, this is what my h is going to turn out to be, right? I have not proved it yet, but this is what my h is going to turn out to be. Okay, anyway, let's come there in a moment. I need one more thing. L0 of add xs is the centralizer of x, which is all y such that xy is 0, right? That's by definition. And here is where I say that, look, add x, so this is the part on which add x acts nilpotently, but of course add x also acts by, add x always acts semi-simply. This is the part on which it acts nilpotently. So this is the part on which add xs acts by 0. In other words, it commutes. So this is the, thank you. Sorry, centralizer of xs. Now, remember this is h. Yes, but what does that mean?
But you might have to operate add xs several times. No?
That is okay. But if something is nilpotent and it is also diagonalizable, because xs is a semi-simple operator.
So it
Just
not a power, but first power
itself must be. So look at this h. This h I have shown is of this type and of that type, but it is also of all of that type, because that's how we started. So what does that mean? See, if you take this X sub S, it is one semi-simple element, right? If you take its centralizer, there will be some subalgebras there consisting of semi-simple elements, right? In particular, I can take a maximal one, and so that maximal one will turn out to be a maximal toral subalgebra. Here I see that I overlooked a point. Something that is maximal in this centralizer, why should it be maximal in the whole thing? No, I want to take minimality of this type, but actually I want to, now I want to say that it is a maximal toral subalgebra. That's what I want to conclude. Of if in this, why is it maximal toral in the whole thing? It's toral, that is okay. But maximal in this, why should it be maximal in the whole thing? Okay. Okay.
So that maximal total subalgebra should be inside this PL of XS, because
Thank you. Because we know that thank you. Yes, thanks. Thanks to what we proved earlier, because they are abelian. So, all right. So again, let me repeat what he said. You take a maximal toral subalgebra containing X sub S. Now, that is commutative. We showed that, and therefore it must be contained in here, right? Okay. So where does that take us? Now we just have to say some words. So therefore, H includes a maximal toral subalgebra, right? It's in here, right? So H includes a maximal toral subalgebra, but we already saw that maximal toral subalgebras are, remember the other direction we did, right? So if you have a maximal toral subalgebra, it's already all of these things. Okay. So now I claim that the proof is over. Why is that? Do we use minimality or? So therefore H includes a maximal toral subalgebra. Let's call it H prime. H prime is a CSA. Correct. But we are done now. H prime is a CSA, correct? But H was also a CSA. That's how we started with it, and now H prime is inside it. So those guys are minimal with respect to being of this form, and therefore H prime is also equal to H, and H prime is, therefore H prime equals H. So what was the point of this proof? The point of doing this was to say that, look, those your maximal toral subalgebras can be realized as centralizers of just a single semi-simple element. Now those semi-simple elements are special. If you take centralizer of the identity element or some scalar matrix, okay, we are in a semi-simple Lie algebra and scalar matrices are not in SLN, but nonetheless it does not matter for this purpose. Just one second. So if we take centralizer of the identity or a scalar matrix, I will get everything. So I have to take some special elements for which this happens. So in SLN I need to find some. So what are these elements in SLN? Semi-simple elements, such that if I take just that single element, its centralizer is only the diagonal matrices. You're saying SL2, but in general what will it be? What sort of elements are there? So it is something. So those are called regular semi-simple elements, and such things always exist. Yes, you had a.
sorry, can you just repeat why H includes a maximal total?
Okay. So look at this semi-simple element. H is precisely those things that commute with it. Okay. Now look at just this semi-simple element. Consider a maximal toral subalgebra including that. That can always be done. Okay. Now, we have proved that a maximal toral subalgebra is abelian, and therefore, it will be contained inside H, and therefore, it will, yeah, then the proof goes through. So, I will just say such XS. So, XS such that, how many of them are there? Are there a few, a lot? You recall what he just said, that in the normal case, it just simply means in SLN, just simply means that all the diagonal entries, if you have two repeated diagonal entries, then that's a little scalar block, right. So, you will pick identity matrices of that, I mean all matrices of in that particular block, you want to avoid that. So, you need to have distinct eigenvalues. So, my question is, how many matrices are there of that type? Semi-simple matrices, which are semi-simple elements of the Lie algebra, which are regular. Are there a lot of them or a few of them? I mean, this is for SLN, it's an n square minus 1 dimensional vector space, right. So, among these, if I take all the regular semi-simple ones, how many of them are there? Think about it. Okay. So, now actually, so this will be the consequence of the following theorem, about which I will talk for some time and then we will stop. For any Lie algebra L, its Cartan subalgebras are conjugate under so that's the theorem. And this will be a consequence of two statements. One, that Cartan subalgebras of a solvable Lie algebra are conjugate Lie algebra L are conjugate under this group EL. So, how do we go from the solvable case to the general case? I want to use something or the other about solvable Lie algebras to deduce something about general Lie algebras. So, I try to find solvable Lie algebras in the general Lie algebra and try to use that. Okay. So, again these are theorems which I will not prove, but let us try to prove this assuming these two. Borel subalgebras of arbitrary L, the algebra L, are conjugate under. By the way, conjugate under this simply means that there is an automorphism of this kind which takes any one to any other one. So, what is the definition of a Borel subalgebra? It is a maximal solvable subalgebra. These algebras are less important here, but for algebraic groups they are extremely important to build the theory. So, I have introduced Cartan subalgebras, we will talk about Borel subalgebras. The third topic, automorphisms of L, we will see how automorphisms of L are built out of these ones and some other ones. Let's get rid of this. So, let us talk about this group a little bit. So, what is the point of this group? So, note that, so this is normal, this is just a matter of observing. So check. I mean, what is this? See, if you have an arbitrary automorphism, then after all, how are these guys generated? This is generated by taking the exponential of add x, but that is just some polynomial in add x, right? So, I have to see what this automorphism behaves with respect to each term add x, but what does it mean to be an automorphism of Lie algebra? That brackets are preserved. So, you just write down the equation and then this is what will pop out. So, I will just say check and let us make some observations. So, I will repeat what Humphreys says, is that, see, in the end I do not really care that it is stable under this per se. I just want that there should be some automorphism which takes one Cartan subalgebra to another. So, why this? Because the point is that this behaves better with respect to subalgebras and quotients. So, let us just make some observations. So, 1, if let us say K subalgebra of L, then you see that we strongly add nilpotent elements for K and strongly add nilpotent elements of L. How will they behave? So, look at this. Strongly add nilpotent elements are elements in here. No, L sub A, where A is not 0. That is the whole point. If A is not 0, then it will keep shifting the eigenspace, and so it will be nilpotent eventually. That is the thing. So, K subalgebra of L, and of course I have it written here, but this is supposed to be obvious. So, is there some obvious relation? Suppose I take something in here. Right. So, if I take some operator add x, so let us take that x is in K, no, not x is in K, but let us suppose that I have some y which is in the generalized A eigenspace of some operator add x. You see, the same equation will continue to hold true in L also, right? Because let's think of it. What does this mean? I take x in K subalgebra. I take add x as the operator on K, then I decompose K into generalized eigenspaces and I take something which is in one of the non-zero eigenspaces. Well, now you look at the same operator on L, what was in a non-zero eigenspace will still continue to be in a non-zero eigenspace, right? The operator acts on a bigger space, but how does it matter? The generalized eigenspaces may become bigger, but so is this okay? And therefore, what it means is that What does it mean? Moreover, if I take this, see, this is the thing, when you write the notes, when you are reading the book, everything appears so nice and clean, but when it comes to reproduce it on your own, it is not always like that. So, this is generated by, so what is this? This is a subgroup of automorphisms of L which is generated by things coming from here. So, this is generated by X of add L in X, but X is taken from strongly add nilpotent elements from K. Right, is the definition of this clear? So, I take strongly add nilpotent elements from K, which are, remember, which are a subset of strongly add nilpotent elements from L, and I take the group of automorphisms generated by exponentiating adds of those things, but on L. The point to note is the following. Note. How is this related to again note, I take strongly add nilpotent elements in K, I take the corresponding automorphisms of L, but what are the automorphisms of K which come from strongly add nilpotent elements from itself? This is the earlier one. It is simply all these guys, and each one of them you simply restrict. Right? So, this is going to be a useful observation for us, because if I can take something, then I can always find something here, you see. So I will just make again the comment that Humphreys makes. See, if I take add X, where X is in K, and suppose, see, how do I, in general, I am allowed to take the exponential of add X whenever add X is nilpotent, right, in any Lie algebra. So, if I do it for K, I am allowed to take X of add X whenever add X acts nilpotently on K. But now, see, if I take the same X and consider its action on all of L, who is going to, what is the guarantee that it will act nilpotently on all of L, right? So, I do not know that. Whereas, you look at this definition. This definition tells me that if an element of this type, if it works for K, it is also going to continue to work for L, because if it was already in a non-zero generalized eigenspace in a smaller subalgebra, it will continue to be so in a bigger subalgebra. So, that is so it behaves well with respect to subalgebras, and actually also with respect to quotients, but I will not write that down. So this player I have. Now let us talk about Borel subalgebras for a bit. Okay, I have to finish in 5+ minutes, maybe 10 at the most. So Borel subalgebra, which is a maximal solvable So there are some facts about this which are fairly easy here, but they have but in the group case they require quite a bit of work. So Borel algebras are self-normalizing. If you take some x which normalizes, if you take something which normalizes a solvable subalgebra, you add it, the line, and then you will see that when you take B plus the line added of the other thing, when you calculate the bracket, you will fall back within B. And so therefore, after adding something, you will still stay solvable, but this was maximal. So this is an easy fact here. So Borels of L are in 1-to-1 correspondence with Borels of L mod rad L. This is the solvable radical, and this is again a straightforward thing, right, because of 1-to-1 correspondence between things. Why is this nice? This means that to find out Borel subalgebras of an arbitrary Lie algebra, I can actually just go to semi-simple case and see what happens there. So, let us look at what happens to a semi-simple Lie algebra. So, if L is semi-simple, so I am in this case, then define B of delta. First I define n of delta. So, I will, so again I have h, phi and also delta. What is delta? Simple root. So, choosing simple roots is the same as choosing a positive system, same as choosing a Weil chamber. Okay, so I have made that choice corresponding to, and one example to keep in mind is for a cell n. This is epsilon 1 minus epsilon 2 minus epsilon 3, all those together they form a base, right. So, this by definition is that part which consists only of positive roots. So, this is L alpha greater than 0. This is nilpotent. Why is that? If you keep taking brackets, what will happen? Remember height, it will keep going up. So, eventually you will die, that is one way of saying it, and this is h plus n delta. So, this is nilpotent, and I claim that this is solvable. Why is it solvable? Well, if I take a bracket of this with itself, I fall within n, and that is nilpotent, and in fact this is maximal solvable. Why? See, if I could get something bigger, h sits inside that, right? So, it will have to be it will have to have eigenspaces of h, and so all the positive ones are included. So, if it were something bigger, then one of the negative ones would have to be there. So, some minus alpha is there, then you make merry, right, that copy of SL2 will be there, and then how can it be solvable, etc. So, this is a Borel, and this is called a standard Borel, a standard Borel corresponding to delta. So, how many standard Borels are there? If I am, so for each delta I will get a standard Borel. So, how many standard Borels are there? So, that means I am allowed to fix only h. Once I fix an h, as many as the number of Weil chambers, or as many as the number of elements in the Weil group. So, these are the standard Borels, and so it's so this is all, these are observations. All standard Borels are conjugate. Under what? How will you go from one standard Borel to another? How do you go from one basis to another? How do you go from one small Weil chamber to another? You go by steps, right? And each one of the steps is a, I mean, on the geometric level, it's just a reflection. But we know that such things, if you have a reflection, there is a corresponding automorphism, right? There is a corresponding automorphism of the Lie algebra. We constructed this for SL2, remember, right? The x for, what was it? X add x alpha, x add y alpha, and then minus. No? So, all Borels are conjugate, which basically come from those reflections which generate the Weil group. So, we have a nice picture. So, let us assume these two theorems, and let me try to sketch how this one comes, or conjugate under epsilon of n. So, I'll say sketch. So, theorem 1, 2, theorem 3, sketch of theorem 3. Reason why I want to do this is because there are, you see this kind of thing once again in the algebraic course. Okay, sketch of 3. So, there are H and H prime, which are both Cartan subalgebras of an arbitrary Lie algebra L, and I want to show that they are conjugate. How am I going to do that? This is nilpotent. Remember, that was one of the, so in particular it is solvable, it will sit inside some maximal solvable thing. So, put them inside here and put this one also in here. Okay. And now we are done, right, because this is conjugate to this, so just conjugate. But then what will happen? So, there is some, and I will stick to my notation here, there is some sigma in here, sigma in L, that will take B to B prime, but the point is it will not necessarily take H to H prime, it will just take to something, right. But already I am good because H will go to something here, and H prime is also sitting here, right. So, both of these now are sitting inside B prime, okay. And so, then you conjugate them within B prime. There is a little more to say. So, I get so I have so this one will take H to some sigma of H. Now, both sigma of H and H prime are sitting in B prime. So, there is a tau, but where is this tau? See, there is this tau which takes H prime to sigma H, but where is tau? So, this is in but you see this epsilon B prime is obtained by taking restrictions of things of this kind. So, after all you can get it from an automorphism of the big Lie algebra, right. That is equal to epsilon L B prime. So, by means of this tau, and so therefore, you get that I should really say tau prime, and therefore, there exists a tau in epsilon, no, this is not equal, which are, I am sorry, these are not equal, these are automorphisms of B prime, but there are restrictions in here. So, this I will just say, which restricting to tau prime on B. And so, what is the final thing? Therefore, if I take that tau and apply it to sigma of H, I will get H prime. How do you know? How do you know such a, sorry, not tau prime. So, tau prime exists because now you are sitting inside a single solvable subalgebra B prime, in which there is H prime and also sigma of H. So, using the E of B prime, I can conjugate one onto the other, but B prime is a subalgebra of L, and so we saw that the elements, the automorphisms obtained by taking strongly add nilpotent elements from B prime, those come from things of that kind, and so there is a corresponding tau. Okay. This is where you working with that E came in handy rather than working with arbitrary automorphisms, because an arbitrary automorphism of smaller Lie algebra, how do I know that it comes from something for the whole thing? So, since I am out of time, I will not do the last thing by writing, but I will at least try to say it. You can use this kind of analysis to say, okay, so I suppose I have a semi-simple Lie algebra, then what will be an arbitrary automorphism of it? And the line of reasoning is the following, that arbitrary automorphism will take, you start with a standard Borel, it will take that automorphism to some Borel. Then I can use one of the guys I like, the E of L, to bring it back to the same Borel. So now you have fixed the Borel, and now you start fixing various things. And there was one theorem which I did not write down, which is the first section, is that whenever there is an automorphism of the root systems, you can actually lift it to an automorphism of the Lie algebra. Automorphisms of, where, by the way, where do automorphisms of root systems come from? Automorphisms of root systems, many of them are easy to write down. They will come from the Weil group, but there is also something coming from the Dynkin the graph automorphism, correct? So it's a fact that once you have an automorphism of the root system, then you can lift it to an automorphism of the Lie algebra by making a choice about what to do for each simple root space. You are allowed to pick non-zero scalars. So putting all of these ingredients together, and the kind of thing that we did, you first fix the Borel, then you fix the H within that, and once you have this data fixed, then you bring in that there must be an automorphism of the root system up to certain scalars. Okay. So I will just write down the end result and then I will stop. The end result is that after all this song and dance, can I find it? For semi-simple L, this one actually turns out to be, every inner automorphism will actually come from this kind, and moreover the entire is just the semi-direct product of this one with the one that comes from the graph automorphism. So int L. These are the automorphisms that come from graph automorphisms. So now one of these is normal, right? So which one is normal? This one is normal, so it should go like this. This is the semi-direct product. So this is the result that is stated in Humphreys but not proved. He gives a reference to Jacobson. You know, to recap, the three goals that I had in the beginning, they were all fairly straightforward, at least just to explain where it comes from. But I would like you to sort of go away with the message that the kinds of things that we did to get there they are important techniques. And if you study algebraic groups at some point, then some of these ideas you have to prove the analogous theorems, and there is no way without going through them. So yeah, sorry for going over time. Stop.